Check. Okay. Good morning again, everyone.
Good morning.
So, before we start, are there any burning questions that you have about Revelation or, in general, before I just...
Oh, about life? No.
About life? Okay. So we'll try to get as far as we can today, but we probably won't get through everything. Last week we had started to talk about the big questions that you ask about books in the Bible. Who wrote it? When was it written? Who was the intended audience? What genre is it? We've talked about the genre of Revelation, and it encapsulates many things. It's not one singular thing. It's not like a Pauline epistle. It's not a gospel. It's not a prophetic book. It's not a liturgical text. It's a combination of all of those things. Not a gospel. It's a combination of all the other things except for a gospel. So the other thing to ask is, who wrote the Apocalypse of John? And of course the answer is John. And the question is, well, which John? Because that's a very popular Greek name for that period. Biblical books don't typically self-disclose who wrote them. And usually when they do, you should be suspicious of it, because it's probably somebody trying to lend some legitimacy to their writing by using a more popular name. For example, the Song of Songs, which you probably have been taught to think was written by Solomon. It most likely wasn't, because the Hebrew of that book is much later than the time that the historical Solomon would have lived. But whoever wrote that book was an anonymous nobody who wanted their book to be important and to be read, so they say this is written by Solomon. And it works.
It worked.
But when we talk about the authorship of Revelation, some people might say, well, this is the same John that wrote the Gospel. Well, the problem with that is that the Greek of the Gospel of John is very simple and plain. It would be like maybe an 8th grade level of Greek. And then you jump to the book of Revelation, where 1 in 8 words are what we call a habex legomenon. Does anyone know what a habex is?
Just a single occurrence in the literature?
Yes. No, New Testament literature, right? Very small slice of Greek literature. But in the New Testament, John contains a lot of words that only appear in John, which should tell you that whoever wrote that book wrote at a high level of Greek. So it's nearly impossible on the basis of stylistic grounds to say that the author of Revelation is also the author of the book of John. So, well, which John could it be? Because we also have the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John in the New Testament as well. So the idea, and this is where a lot of New Testament scholarship goes, we can't really identify who the Matthew was who wrote Matthew, but it's likely that there was a community of people who contributed to that particular gospel. It's likely that with all of the Johannine literature of the New Testament, that there's a community behind these books. And so perhaps it's better to think about a group of people who are contributing to this small piece of, portion of literature in the New Testament rather than one single guy. Now, I don't know. Is there some historicity to the idea that a guy named John got stranded on an island and had these visions? I mean, there's probably a kernel of truth in that. Again, the question is, which John was it? Maybe he was associated with this community. Let's see, date. Yeah, when was it written? People have really tried to nail down, well, which set of persecutions might have been going on when Revelation was written. I mentioned that there are some small localized persecutions that happened under Nero, which is in the mid to late 60s. And there's another set of localized persecutions that happened under Domitian and 86 to 96. So that's kind of like, there's a range there, maybe somewhere in that range. The Revelation of John definitely seems to be later than Paul's letters, which are the earliest literature that we have in the New Testament. So I can't give you a precise date. There's no copyright information with this book. But
Joel, where
yes.
were Nero and Domitian, where were they located?
Rome.
Rome.
They would have been in Rome, yes. There's some evidence to suggest this might post-date the time of Nero. We'll get to the infamous 666. Okay, we'll get to what that possibly means. It's a game of numbers, but we'll take a look at that.
So this was written, so Paul's letters were first, then the Gospels, then this.
I would say that Paul's letters, the majority of them came first. Paul's letter to the Romans could have been, Paul's letter to the Romans could have overlapped with some of the earliest gospel literature. And this, I would say that Revelation and the Gospels are all kind of around the same time. Like the Gospel of Luke is probably our latest gospel toward the end of the 1st century. But the Gospel of Mark is probably closer to like late 60s. I wouldn't date any of the Gospels before the destruction of Jerusalem and the fall of the temple, although there are scholars who will defend earlier dates. Okay, so we know a little bit, or we know what we don't know about authorship and date, which is just as important, okay? Let's do a simplified version of this. Okay, how is the book of Revelation laid out? You have an opening vision of the risen Lord, and you have these 7 letters to the 7 churches, and then you have kind of that central vision of God and the Lamb and the heavenly throne room, the opening of seals, and that sort of thing. Then you have this large portion that is primarily visions of the judgment of God. And finally, you have part of the book that we all love, the vision of the new creation. But there is a movement to, let's see, we looked at this last week. I don't want to do Mr. Schofield yet. I want to see, where are you? I want us to just look for a moment at how the book moves, because it's somewhat non-linear. And I want to, if you read Revelation all in one setting, you're going to be like, wow, what is, it's like a montage of weird symbols and visions coming at you. Scholars have kind of pinned down a sort of movement here that might make sense. And if you keep in mind the way that apocalyptic literature, which we talked about the first week, apocalyptic literature is fundamentally dualistic. So you have the heavenly sphere, where everything is right, correct, and true, and you have an earthly sphere, which is irredeemably fallen and controlled by evil forces. And the book of Revelation seems to vacillate somewhat between, unsurprisingly, vacillate between these. So you have the visions at the bottom of the loop. So for instance, the 7 messages to the church, which threaten and unmask false sources of security in the earthly or mundane dimension in that apocalyptic worldview. So you kind of go to the bottom and you dwell on everything that's wrong and what needs to be corrected. And then you go to these magnificent heavenly scenes that you get at the top of the loop, which transports the reader into the presence of the slain lamb, the heavenly chorus and choir, the celebration of God's triumph over evil. And then when you feel sufficiently good about what that vision is like, then it plunges you back down into riders on different colored horses who are bringing bad things and all of that. With the 7 seals. and then you're transported back into a heavenly scene, and it just keeps going. It kind of moves that way. And of course, it ends up with the vision of the new creation. So just in terms of the way the book moves, keep that in mind. If you sit and read Revelation, you're like, what is going on here? Okay, this is a work of apocalyptic literature, so I have to keep in mind that you've got the things of heaven, true heavenly sphere, and you've got the things of earth. And you're reading the literature of the people who are living under the threat of empire, under possible persecution, in a time of economic insecurity, and they're looking for God to break into that sphere and offer some sort of hope. And that's fundamentally what apocalyptic literature does for Jews and later for Christians. Now, the 7 letters. There are a number of ways that the 7 letters have been interpreted. We can look at it from the textual standpoint and just ask what is happening with, what is being asked of these churches in their setting. And you can say, okay, well, Ephesus, there's kind of this affirmation of what they're doing, but then there's also a challenge. So remember your first love, right? You did this well. You've kind of fallen off the wagon a little bit. So remember that. Remember Jesus, and then take yourselves to confession. Okay, repent. Smyrna, don't fear the impending suffering that is coming. Pergamum, repent from indifference to belief or heresy. You can see all of the different things that are being asked of the churches. Now, there's one that's an outlier. Philadelphia apparently was doing some things right, so they just get keep doing what you're doing, okay? This is good. The lukewarmness. We should discuss lukewarmness for a second. What do you think? Because that gets used a lot. What does lukewarm mean to you? When you think of that, how has it been used in the religious context, maybe that you grew up in, or how you experience it now? What is it to be lukewarm?
Uncommitted.
Uncommitted, okay?
Ambiguous.
Okay,
Go with the flow.
yeah,
Unenthusiastic.
okay, yeah. So, if we try to put this into the context of a Roman city, number 1, and then number 2, put it into the context of a Jewish understanding of the way things are used in the world. Let's start with the Roman city. So Roman cities were, in terms of infrastructure, very advanced in the ancient world. What was the one thing that Roman cities had that was, in terms of water, moving water from one place to another, what did they have?
Aqueducts.
The aqueducts. Okay, water moves through aqueducts, and that's a good thing, because when water stops moving and it sits, and this is the time before there's any water treatment or purification, right? So when water stops moving and it sits, that's ick. So moving water, that's a good thing. Moving water is almost always cool or cold water. In Jewish tradition, water is thought to be useful when it is hot. There are certain uses for hot water, and there are many uses for cold water as long as it is moving. Cold water is good as long as it is moving. Hot water is good as long as you use it for the precise purpose that you need it. Lukewarm water is the indicator that it's neither of those things. So it falls outside of acceptable uses. So it's not only about temperature, but it's about the things that are it's about what it's being used for. And in the context of a Roman city, then it goes to indicate the underlying issue with lukewarm water, and that it's putrid, it's disgusting, right? It will make you sick, it's bad. So think about all of those things, and I think And I don't know exactly what to do with that, because my sense when lukewarmness gets used is that there's some kind of uncommitted sense to it, unenthusiastic, and the idea is, well, you need to be hot. I think the assumption is you should be hot. That's what you should be. That's the morally correct thing. But in a Jewish context, in the context of a Roman city, cold water is also useful. In one of the earliest Christian documents called the Didache, the teaching, it's the earliest instructions we have of baptism. And it says that baptism is to happen in, have you read this?
This morning I read it.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, I've read it a couple
Yeah.
times, but I just.
This was part of the Nag Hammadi finds. Baptism is to be conducted in cold running water. Okay, at the site of Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. In that compound, for the ancient world, in a private setting, we have the most intricate series of running baths for the purpose of purification. So that's a Jewish context, right? In a community that was highly focused on purity. And so these baths were not just pools that you filled up and left. They actually had running water. Water was always moving through this system of pools at Qumran. And then you have the evidence from a later Christian document that cold running water was how a proper baptism is supposed to happen. So what do we do about lukewarm? I mean, in my mind, we need to reframe how it's used. How are we using lukewarmness to either to manipulate people into acting in a certain way? I think it's more complex.
It'd be like just not moving, just staying in place. As
Yeah,
far as your religion or practices, and
yeah,
I think it's treading water.
Mhm.
Or becoming polluted.
Yeah, becoming polluted. Yeah.
It's like going through the motions and not really, like just being complacent, not really developing it. Well,
Yeah, and in that sense, temperature really has nothing to do with it, which is, I think, the correct way to start thinking about this, because we always think about it in terms of temperature. But it's what does the lukewarm temperature, what does that point towards in terms of underlying conditions? So this is good. Now, American religion is a weird thing and did weird things to Christianity. Mr. Schofield, Cyrus Schofield, who, he served in the Civil War, okay, and he published his Schofield Reference Bible in 1909. Does anyone know what do I have it up here? I don't. Dispensationalism. He is the originator of the idea that there are dispensations throughout history, and in those dispensations, God acts in particular ways to God's people in those isolated dispensations. So that's how he explains what he perceives as a difference in character of God in the Old Testament and God in the New Testament, which he's not the first guy to think about that, right? There's a whole heresy, the Manichaean, am I getting that right? The Manichaean heresies of the 200s and 300s. But he reads these letters to the 7 churches as being 7 letters that depict 7 periods of church history, right? And so you go back to Ephesus, the apostolic church, and that letter is specific to that period of time. So the earliest, period of Jesus to 100 CE. And then he moves to the worldly, lax medieval church, which, in anti-intellectual American Christianity, that is, that's where the ills of the church, originate. So worldly, lax medieval church. Then you have the Reformation churches, which he's careful to point out, like there's still too much of the medieval church in those Reformation efforts. Philadelphia, this is the true church, 1750 to 20th century, which that would have been, when he's writing. But Philadelphia, and remember, that was the church, keep doing what you're doing. So naturally, he exists in that. He imagines himself as existing in that dispensation. Keep doing what you're doing until the rapture. Remember, week 1, does the word rapture appear in the book of Revelation? No, there's no Greek word for this concept. It is completely made up. And then you have the Church of Laodicea, right? We talked about lukewarm. Okay, so apostate, anti-supernatural church, so 1900 to tribulation. I'm not an expert on dispensationalism, so I'm not going to, there's something weird happening between the timeline of Philadelphia and Laodicea, and I can't tell you the relationship between rapture and tribulation. I don't know that. I don't know that doctrine very well. This just gives you an idea of where some of these ideas enter into the discourse around Revelation, which have persisted for us from 1909, right, when Mr. Scofield published his Bible. It's still used today, right? There's been many reprintings of the Scofield Reference Bible. But yeah, and those concepts are still with us today. This is a picture of Pergamum. It references the throne of Satan. This was a highly metropolitan, cosmopolitan city, right? It's got a really nice amphitheater, as you can see. There's a temple. There's a temple. It's back here, or the remains of it are here. And it's, so the throne of Satan is less about like the actual place where Satan sits, and it's more of a metaphor for the city of Pergamum, which had many problems. Do I have anything about it? I don't. I'm not, okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
How did Pergamum stand out as a counter example compared to other Roman cities, like Rome included? Like, why is this?
They're playing.
The Solomon War?
I can't tell you why Pergamum gets the epithet of throne of Satan, other than that, for early Christians, for early followers of Jesus, this city had a reputation for being a center of emperor worship, for other forms of ritual observance that were counter to what Christians believed, and maybe was the standout in terms of that. But it's a good question, because pretty much every major Roman city would have had a temple to the emperor, would have had some sort of, place to pay obeisance to the gods. So, yeah, I'm not exactly sure why this is the standout, why this is the throne of Satan, but I do want to, my point in it that I want to emphasize here is that we don't want to get hung up too much on like a literal throne of Satan, but rather what that creative name, of which there are many creative things in Revelation, what it points toward. So the 7 pastoral prophetic messages, a wake-up call to the churches, right? And I think that at this point, it's safe to say that Christians are still expecting Jesus to come back like very soon, right? We haven't got to that point where it's like, oh, yep, Jesus is going to come back sometime, but it may not be in our lifetimes. I still think we're in the third and fourth generation, second or third generation of followers of Jesus who are still expecting the near return of Jesus. So there is this sense of urgency and repenting and making sure that they are ready for when Jesus comes back. a word on symbols, because this is where we can get hung up. We can get hung up with trying to decode what the various symbols are that we encounter in Revelation. What does the horseman on the red horse mean? What does the horseman on the white horse mean? What does the horseman on the black horse mean? It's important to recognize that symbols are an important part of much of biblical literature. The plagues in Exodus function to demonstrate God's power over every aspect of the natural world, from birth to death. Okay, every part of those plagues represent that sort of control over all aspects of life as we understand it. You can read the book of Daniel, and there's all the bizarre beasts and the weird statues made out of different like metals and compounds, and we can situate that in terms of, okay, well, this is an indication of the different empires that have come to dominate the Jewish people. Okay, whether we need to assign a certain one to a particular metal or a particular statue, that's kind of beside the point. It's that these symbols are being used to point to something that is wrong in the present time. Let me see here. Yeah, do we want to talk about the beasts? Okay. Polymorphic beasts, and oh yeah, the beasts with all the different heads, right? The polymorphic beasts in Revelation 13. Do you have a Bible in here?
There are quite a few.
Oh, isn't this the Presbyterian thing? Yeah.
Symbol. Yeah, we got it here.
Okay, let's see, Revelation 13. Oh yes, okay. Then the dragon took his stand on the sand of the seashore, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on its horns were 10 diadems, and on its heads were blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. This is wild stuff. When I taught confirmation. I still do occasionally, but students wanted to like read Revelation because they think that that's cool. So I had got one of those big rolls of paper, right, and just like roll it out, and I would read from Revelation, and they would have to illustrate it as I was reading it. It was pretty fascinating. I think the janitor ended up throwing a scroll away, which I was like, no.
I wonder what they did with the horns and the heads.
I mean, there were some like Star Wars looking figures that also were in these drawings. The polymorphic beasts in Revelation 13 harken back to beasts mentioned in the Old Testament, like Leviathan, like Behemoth, like the beasts in Daniel that represent the imperial powers of the day. But these symbols are being used to demonstrate the triumph of God's power over all of the terrible things in the world at the present. And we have to remember, okay, we have the temptation is to want to know exactly what this stuff means. And I would say that in terms of the Bible as a whole, we want to know exactly what it meant in its time. And well, biblical scholars try to do that. But this is an old piece of literature, pieces of literature from like a wide variety of times, and it's fundamentally different. It's hard to it's impossible to know, well, what did the earliest hearers, what did they think about when they heard about, the 10 horns and the 7 heads? What was that to them? We can speculate. Rome is built on a series of 7 hills, so that gets brought up in discussions about Revelation. And as I've said, I think the primary focus and critique of Revelation is Roman imperial power, which is situated in the capital city of Rome. So the question is not what is the exact corollary of these symbols or these images, but rather how are these symbols being used to demonstrate the triumph of God's power, the ultimacy of the heavenly sphere, right? The breaking in of the heavenly sphere to everything that's wrong in the earthly sphere. And then how does that point us to what is true and eternal and good and hopeful? Why? So then I guess that, why dwell on what all the bad stuff means in Revelation? Why not focus on the positive, the things that are true, the things that are beyond this worldly sphere? Now, as I say that, we have to hold that in tension with what we've come to hear about the new creation. Gosh, which I do want to get to. There's a question.
So, I'm just curious, like, you talk about symbols, and I think, is there any political consideration in symbolism of Revelation or any of the other New Testament books? Because for instance, you said some scholars might think the 7 heads or the 7 hills. Is that like, the legions are going to come after and could just say, hey, Rome's corrupt and it has 7 hills, or is that just not a factor?
I would say that's probably not a factor. I would argue that Revelation is a highly subversive book, but the extent to which it was read outside of Christian circles is, we might be overstating it in the sense that then that language becomes a political liability. Theoretically, it could be if it were read by, people outside of these circles. But the extent to which that is a thing is, the odds are small. It's like, who reads Christian literature? I mean, well, just to be honest, like I said, Revelation is probably some of the highest advanced Greek that we have in the New Testament. The rest of the New Testament would be like Greek people look down on. That's like the literature is so far beneath where classical Greek was at this time. And as someone who went to seminary and learned Greek, my entry point to learning Greek was the Bible, and I was like, wow, this is pretty easy. And then I went to my PhD program, and they were like, here, you need to read some Philo, and you need to read some of the philosophers. And I was like, this language looks, it's totally different. So the idea that literate ruling classes in this period, they would want nothing to do with this lowly literature of the Christians.
Wow.
They would really look down on it. At least at this point, right? Once empire takes over with Constantine, then you've got of course by that point, then you have a whole series of Christian scholars like Origen of Alexandria, like St. Jerome. You've got a lot of really advanced thinking, highly educated Christian scholars who are doing work that really brings Christianity out of the nobody, nothing, lower classes and raises it to a higher level. And we can talk, what does institutionalism do to the church? Oh yes, okay, so here, now we're at the point, we've got to hit the high points here. Okay, so the mark of the beast. Do we have it? Is it a chip that it wasn't implanted in you? I've heard all of these, the mark of the beast, all of these things. I don't know. You all weren't raised in fundamentalist spaces. Okay. I was, so this was anything that Bill Gates did was some new interpretation of the mark of the beast. Okay, so Revelation 13-19 depicts judgments of Satan, a figure like Nero in Rome. Let's see, this calls for wisdom. Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a person. Its number is 666. Okay, so this is a very common manipulation of letters that, and numbers that is common in Jewish literature. And this is possible because there are no numbers as we think of them. Are the Arabic numerals? Is that what we call these? Like zero, you know? There's no Arabic numerals in Hebrew. In Hebrew, the letters stand for a number. That's how they think about them. It's a somewhat complex system to learn. My Hebrew students, I don't make them. I should make them memorize this, but they don't. So how can you arrange letters to equal a particular number? And in this case, like, you can arrange the letters of Caesar's name. Neron, so Nero, that's, if you were to write Nero in Hebrew, it would look like Neron Caesar, which is Caesar, okay? And each of these letters, I've given you here what each of them mean. The Nun in Hebrew equals 50, the Resh equals 200, the Vav equals 6, okay, on and on. And when you add up the numerical value of Nero's name, you get 666. So then it becomes not something like a mark of Satan. It becomes an indicator of an evil person in this world who's doing bad things, which would seem to, when I talked about the dating of the book, like the book can't predate Nero, right? That's the, yeah.
Are there other examples of this Hebrew practice of taking a Hebrew term, reducing it to numbers and throwing it around as code? Or is this a unique case?
In the New Testament, this is a unique thing in the New Testament, and obviously there's no Hebrew in the New Testament. So this is what scholars. So then it becomes weird because Revelation is written in Greek. So then you have to think that the assumption is that you've got at least a couple people in that Johannine community who are able to talk about, who understand Hebrew or Aramaic. This also works with Aramaic, which was, Aramaic was the lingua franca in the Holy Land, or Judea at this time. But Greek, in the context of Revelation, which appears to be more of a diaspora, or, it's not focused on Judea, Greek is obviously the language. So that's why, like, there's obvious Jewish influence in this book, and that's why the first week I talk about, we can't really draw a hard line between Judaism and Christianity yet, because all of these things, it's just I hate to say melting pot because of how we use that today, but yeah, everything is like in there, and everyone is borrowing these symbols and terminology to do what they want and to convey the message that they want to convey. But, and it's important to note that there was a common myth in the Greco-Roman world. Nero redivivus is the myth that Nero was going to come back to life. So like there's this myth that's also in the air. Everyone knows this goofy myth. So yeah. The number 666, the mark of the beast, that was used as a scare tactic for kids like me in the content, and many other kids, right? And it's like, a really scary thing. What if you do something and you get the mark of the beast, you get left behind? This is like highly traumatic, like traumatizing to children. And it's really more of you can ground this in real world events, a real person, and come up with a more plausible solution. Okay, we gotta end with a new creation, right? You don't want to end with all of the terrible things. Okay, so after exposing the trials and tribulations and everything that's wrong with the world, not just on an immoral or spiritual plane, but also an economic sort of dimension, the use of violence, right? The powers of the world use violence. God is fundamentally not asking the early followers of Jesus, the early Christians, to mimic those powers of violence. God is doing the work of breaking in and making it possible for a new heaven and new earth. So then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them as their God. They will be his peoples, and God himself will be with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away." And the one who is seated on the throne said, "See, I am making all things new." Also he said, "Write this, for these words are trustworthy and true." Now when you read that, where's the location of this new heaven and new earth? Read closely. How?
Here, the
Coming
home
back.
of God is
It's-
among mortals. He will
Yeah,
dwell
it's
with them as their
Yeah, exactly. It's not that mortals are going to dwell with God, it's that God is dwelling with mortals. At the same time, we also have the first heaven and earth had passed away. So, I mean, it is, I don't know, what does the imagery depict here? How does it challenge the standard conceptions of, earthly existence and whatever we think about the afterlife, whether it's heaven or, I don't see a mention of hell here. Did I include them? I like the depiction of the holy city. At the end, it says that, let's see, its gates are never closed. It has no need of light because God is the light in the city. And I don't know why I don't have this. There's something interesting about there's a tree. There's a mention of the tree of life and the healing qualities of its leaves. The leaves are for the healing of the nations. And I often wonder, and we don't talk about that. I mean, this is clearly talking about a new Jerusalem, which we're kind of entering, I'm going to say a term that's highly charged right now. But I need you to think about it in terms of theology and not politics. Where with the new Jerusalem and that centering vision on Jerusalem, you're entering into a kind of theological Zionism, okay? From the Bible, nothing to do with modern Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, anything like that, okay? No conception of Zionism of, the late 1800s and what we think of now. But a theological Zionism that you get from the book of Isaiah, that you're getting glimpses of here, where Jerusalem stands as kind of the final vision of where everything good ends up. And it becomes a place for the healing of the nations, right? All of the nations come and they stream to Jerusalem. Its gates are never closed, right? It is an open place. So I don't know, there are many things, and this is where, I grew up in a context that took the Bible literally, right? This needs to be read literally, particularly when you want to denounce people of different sexual orientations, right? But all of the ideas about Revelation and what it means, and we didn't spend a whole lot of time really looking at the text and exploring what does this actually mean in terms of the afterlife? How much are we actually imposing theological constructs on the text rather than trying to revisit the text, take it seriously, maybe not literally, but take it seriously and try to construct meaning from that.
So it's not saying heaven on earth.
Well, it kind of is. That's a weird thing. It's kind of like heaven on earth, but the former things have already passed, so it's like everything is already new. And we have to remember when Jesus gives the instructions for that prayer, that predates the ideas of Revelation here. And I do think when Jesus says, on earth as in heaven, I have to think that Jesus is thinking in a literal sort of way, and not necessarily thinking about eschatology yet. I think Jesus is talking about the here and now. I think that when you get 3 generations out from Jesus and you get to writings like this, then you've got some eschatology, some theories about the end that have started to form.
And did it say, as in the third one there, loud voices with men and women? Did it actually?
I'd have to look, probably not. That's probably like an RSV. And like, it's, yeah. It's a safe assumption that when when older translations translate men, and I can tell you that having, translating Hebrew and Greek, these terms, they are not specific to men only. They are more of the humankind. And that is how they are understood. Usually when there are places where you just want to talk about specifically to be really reductive, a biological man, there are different terms in Hebrew and there are different terms in Greek that would be used when you're talking about a biological man and a biological woman, rather than humankind in general. We could look at the Genesis story, okay, and do a whole thing on that in terms of how.
So next year.
So, yeah, we want to do a class on Genesis. Yeah, we could spend quite a bit of time on Genesis.
And speaking of calendars, do we have another week or do we need to just kind of
We should end
be
it
done
here.
for now?
My wife is probably ready for me to leave her with the kids after Sunday. Our summer has officially started. Today is the first day of potty training for our 2.5-year-old. Yeah.
And that's because your wife is a teacher, right?
Yeah, she
So
does
she's
work.
kind of put it
Yeah,
off
so we're like
till the
on
end of the
summer,
school
yeah.
year.
End of the school year, I'm done teaching, she's out of school. So now we're home and have to survive this summer. So,
My mother came and decided she would potty train our son, who was more interested not. So she would sit him down and read to him, and he didn't get up until he did his thing. So he finally realized if he ever wanted to play, he had to go in the potty.
the method now is to let I let Anna do this, take care of this. I'm the guy who, like, we need something, I leave the house and go get it. She stays at the house with the kids, and this is what she did with our son too, but they just go without pants. And it's like, they're just running around naked. It's like, and we've got our portable potty that we've got.
That you travel with?
So far this morning, she's used the potty 2 times. We have not had any accidents yet. So,
That's what they do in China.
so we'll see how it goes.
So you do a church in like 3 minutes.
I know, you need to get